I hit the go live button. It says we are live. So welcome everyone. And yeah, so we can.
Welcome.
Oh no, we can't. We can't even see anyone yet because we have the intro slide in there. So welcome to PHP Release Sara episode 2 on PHP 8 with Sara Golemon and Gabriel Caruso. Thanks a lot for being here. And I will get a few technical things out of the way first. So we are live. The stream is a little bit behind, like 10 seconds or so. But you can ask questions in the chat. We will read it along. We might not answer right away, but we have a Q&A session at the very end. So just keep your questions coming, and then we will address them later. And we will keep the stream online afterwards, so you can always rewatch things that you missed. And I think that is the most important technical stuff. So, Christopher, do you want to take over with the greetings?
So, welcome to episode 2. It's our very first episode about a PHP release itself. So it's quite amazing that the release managers Sara and Gabriel are joining us tonight. So thanks for that already. Maybe you can just give us a quick introduction about who you are and how you got to PHP, maybe?
And I see Gabriel indicating at me, so I'll start. Hi, my name is Sara Golemon. I've been working on the PHP project for about 18 years now, give or take, since about 2002, so do the math. I was a release manager for 7.2, which has just finished, gotten out of security as of about a month or two ago. And now I'm getting to work on 8.0 with Gabriel, which is a exciting time.
Yeah, so hello everyone. My name is Gabriel. One fact that I like to talk about me, I'm from Brazil, but I live in the Netherlands. So I have experienced both, not extremes of the world, but different parts of the world. In terms of PHP, I have been working with PHP for the past 4 to 3 years, not longer than that, because I have discovered PHP in high school. And I'm only 23 years old. So Sara has been working with PHP almost as long as I've been alive. And yeah, in terms of taking care of PHP, I have been working with PHP internals not longer than 2 years. And the last year, I got the opportunity to be the release manager together with Sara, and we're going to talk about that today.
Yeah, maybe you can just give us a quick intro how you got in release manager. So Sara told us it is your second time, so it might be very funny to do it. So just keeping up the work from 7.2 to 8.0. And Gabriel, for you, it's the first time. Gabriel, how did you get involved into being a release manager on 8.0?
So in my case, since I started to work with the PHP internals, there were this thing of releasing PHP versions, and I was okay. How interesting that, because it's not, there's the part of working and coding for PHP, but there's also the part of releasing that to the public. And then last year there was the call from Derek to candidate to release manager, and then Sara explained in a couple of emails how she was happy to be a release manager, what release managers do, what is the process. And I was like, okay, it's not that difficult. It's interesting. And so I put my name. And then that was the biggest mistake that I made, because I got elected, and for the next 3 years, I need to take care of PHP 8.0, which is also important. Sara and I, we're going to take care of the PHP 8.0x, not all the PHP 8 versions, just the PHP 8.0. And that's how I got into the release manager thing.
Okay, so you got some kind of nominated by Derek.
So I ask in the mailing list, replying to Derek's emails like, hey, me, Gabriel Cruz, I would like to be one of the names in the election. I think there were 4 names: Sara, I, Joe, and Ben, the guy from UUID. So the 4 of us, and then Sara. Sara was the first elected by majority of the votes, and then I think was tied. Yeah, and then was tied between I and Ben, if I'm not wrong. And then Derek gave the vote that put me as a release manager. And yeah, so far so good. Last week I took out the homepage of PHP.net, but so far so good. We're doing a great job.
Just for a little bit of time.
But I did.
the release went out of the door, so everything's fine till now. Yes.
Yeah.
Sarah, you said it's the second time for you. Can you walk us through the release process and the part till end of life? How does it look?
Yeah, sure. Would love to. So as Gabriel already said, it actually starts with deciding who's going to handle a release, and that's done with that call for volunteers. It is a self-nomination process, so you can just be anyone and just say, "Hey, I'll do it." Sure. And it really comes down to the faith of the community to decide who they want to be in charge. We do have 2 release managers for every release, and it's designed so that at least one of them should have experience doing it before. So you have either a sort of a, I want to say master apprentice, but that terminology feels weird.
More senior and
Relationship,
then a
or
more.
yeah, senior junior relationship, or you have 2 people who know what they're doing and they just get it done. When I did my first release of 7.2, we were actually both newbies to the process because we just actually don't have enough people willing to volunteer to do it. Is the problem? So more people who are interested in doing the work on a day-to-day basis, the better. Which is saying a lot because the actual day-to-day work is kind of, I'm not going to say boring, tedious. It is very methodical in plotting. But before we get to that, we have the entire pre-release period. And that starts kind of early summer when, as we're approaching our feature freeze date, and this will be usually end of June, early July kind of timeframe. And all new features, all new development should be not only implemented, but it should actually have gone through all of the RFC review process, voting on it, getting accepted by the rest of the community to say, yes, we do want this in the next upcoming version by the feature freeze date. And there's a little bit of wiggle room to get the actual implementation in at the end, as long as we've agreed upon it. But ideally, by that feature freeze, all the major work should be done. And in a perfect world, we also fork the branch at that point. So the 8.0 release branch is off on its own, and then the master branch is available for new development for 8.1. We let it go a little bit further this time because the JIT was coming, and the sort of bug fixes and work on the JIT was still going pretty heavy at that point. So we didn't want to have to force people to cherry pick things and merge commits across different branches. So I want to say we ended up forking some around, what was it, RC2? Finally, by the time we actually did it, Gabriel?
Was late in the schedule, but yeah.
It was a few releases late, yeah. So we have, broadly speaking, about 10 to 12 releases during our pre-release process. We go Alpha 1, Alpha 2, Alpha 3. Then we hit feature freeze, Beta 1, Beta 2, Beta 3, which is sort of that period for go ahead and finish making your features that got approved before the feature freeze. And then we have our RC period, which is up to 6 release candidates. Although we did, I want to say 5. We'd planned to do 4 release candidates. We actually did 5 release candidates for PHP 8.0. It's kind of down to how stable we think things are, how much work we think needs to be done. So we sat where we ended sitting. And those releases are done every 2 weeks. Finally, at the end, once the final RC has been cut, it's been out for 2 weeks, then we get into GA and the 8.0.0 release. And that mostly involves running some scripts on every 2 week basis because it's the same work every time. So you might as well script that. Nobody wants to be typing in the same commands over and over again. So with 7.1, Davey Shafik made a nice little Docker file that would do probably 80% of the work of a release manager and just get it done. I didn't like some specific choices he made in how he did that. So I actually forked his project and made my own version of it. And that is actually what has Remy and I used for 7.2. I believe Derek and Christoph and Stas and I'm forgetting who else is working on 7.3 and 7.4, but that's what they use for their versions. And Gabriel and I have been using it for 8.0. And then for that other 20% of work, that involves some visual verification of what the release products look like, sending out emails to a couple of lists telling people, hey, this thing's ready for testing, go give it a shot, and updating some bits on the website and publishing change logs and things like that. Just a little bit of rote work, some of which has additional scripts to make it more reliable. I believe the problem that Gabriel ran into that crashed the site when he did the 801 release was not really his fault. There was a bit of code somewhere that assumed that whatever the current release is should have a major branch existing in the old releases file. And that wasn't there because the script that was supposed to put it in failed and either didn't report the failure or he just missed reading the failure. So we fixed the script. So when we get to PHP 9, that should hopefully not happen again. And like I said, the site did not stay down for long. 8.0.0 was a little bit of a special release because the folks at JetBrains came to us before the GA period and said, hey, we think this release is kind of awesome. There's a lot of new features. There's a lot to be excited about. There's a JIT. There's all these other things. Why don't we make a nice little infographic-y kind of page and put that on PHPNet in a way that really kind of celebrates this? So they did the initial draft of that and went through a bunch of edits with us. And we worked with them to get it onto the website. And so that would publish at the same time that 8.0.0 first became available. They did that in 4 languages. I want to say it was English, Russian, was Portuguese maybe was one of the first ones.
Yeah, I'm getting
languages were.
Yeah,
but there were 4 languages.
Actually, now we have way more. We have way more.
Yeah, we have 11 languages now. And I just wanted to underline that difference because those additional 7 language contributions have come from people who are so excited to see this new feature, this new element to the announcement that they're like, I want to put a translation out because I speak. Oh, German was one of them. That's right. German was one of our initial ones. I speak Italian, so here's the Italian version. My own wife actually did the Spanish translation and got that contributed. So, yay, open source working the way it's supposed to.
Yeah.
So that's a view of the pre-release process. Moving forward, it's much less complicated in terms of herding cats on feature freezes and like really pushing the whole testing angle. At this point, we have a 4-week cycle. At the start of the cycle, we release a single release candidate and fork when that specific version branch. So 801 is its own little micro branch. And we say, all right, here's 801 RC1. We're going to tarball that up. We're going to make sure it works. We're going to put it out for testing. And then 2 weeks later, we say, all right, either no bugs have come up in this release or they've come up and we fixed them on that release branch. We're going to bundle up the final version, put it out there, and that's what becomes the official 801. I'd like to point out, although we brought the website down, the actual release was fine. So that is what that process is. So 2 weeks after that official release, we get back to the beginning of the cycle and we do the RC for the next one, which will be 802. Gabriel has asked me if he can take 802 anyway. Normally do kind of a TikTok back and forth, but he wants some practice. So he's going to be doing that. And that continues for 2 years. Every 4 weeks, a new full version of the language comes out, whatever has changed in that time, usually small bug fixes. At the end of 2 weeks, we move into a security-only fix period. And in this case, we no longer have RCs, but the only changes that go on to branch are things that are definitely like security-related bug fixes that have been identified onto the much later branches. And we're just pulling those back just for those specific releases. And we might have 1 of them. We might have 12 of them. It kind of depends on how insecure that version of PHP turned out to be. So anywhere between 26 and 39 total releases across a branch. And that's it. That's all.
That's all. That sounds like a lot of work, actually, and like it's a great commitment to do that over the years, right? So it's is it for your employer maybe something that they worship and give you time for that, or how does it work?
For me, when I started with my current employer, which is MongoDB, by the way, all future statements are not the opinion of my employer. When I started working there, I actually spoke to them in the negotiation period, and I said, look, I've got this commitment to be working on PHP 7.2. I want to make sure that's not going to get in the way of anybody's, IP assignment and yada, 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 yada. So we did a little bit of back and forth, and we eventually decided, you know what? Anything you're doing for PHP is fine. As long as you're not building a database, we don't really care. So that's what it actually came down to. Their lawyers were actually really reasonable about it, honestly. However, I do need to get my real work done. So it's a question of balancing what I'm doing for my day job that pays the bills and what I'm doing for PHP, which um, is my passion. Right now, it's officially work hours. I should be working, but you know what? I'm also way ahead in my work for the sprint, so I'm not going to be too bothered by it, and my boss isn't going to be too bothered by it either.
So
Yeah, I'm on time off, so no problem. Yeah, in my case, it's similar to Sarah's. Actually, I was hired by my current manager in a conference. Like he was like, "Yeah, do you want to work with me?" So he knows that I like to go to conference. I like to work in open source, so we have no problems with that. But one thing that you said sounds like a lot of work. In it, yes, it is. But Sara and others have already automated a bunch of stuff. So what I do when I need to release stuff, as soon as I start to work, I do stand up, I do all the work thing. And then once I start that I need to code or I need to go to a meeting, I left the script running. And then when I come back, I check, okay, everything, cross-check, git log, everything, branch, tags, tarballs, everything generated, cool. Okay, upload, send the emails, done. That's it. That's it. Today,
We are
I don't know in the
programmers by
past.
nature and therefore lazy.
Yeah, always.
So you mentioned there are a lot of release candidates. For 8, it was about 5. So how's the feedback? Is there a lot of feedback in the process already, or is it just a few projects that look for it?
Well, frustratingly, the feedback that comes in, you never get the feedback that says, yes, I definitely tested this and it definitely works. The only feedback you get is, here's a thing that's not working the way I expected.
Yeah.
Fortunately, we do actually get a reasonable amount of that. We get people who are, we know people are testing because when something changes, they let us know. So I feel like we definitely get a decent amount of testing out of this, but we can always use more. Like there's no harm in more people testing. And we announce these release candidates publicly because we want everyone to test it on all of their code. If you have a WordPress site, great, run it on your site and see what it does or doesn't do. And we can say, oh, well, what can we do to make that move more smoothly? Or what extra do we need to put in our upgrading and migration guides to make it clearer what you need to do to make it work correctly?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very easy way to get involved into the process to test. Dennis?
Yeah, I just wanted to because you mentioned the feedback for the release. I remember when, before PHP 8 came out, I tried to build it myself and check it out because I wanted to test the new features. And I hit a snag somewhere. I don't even remember what it was, but the build failed, probably because like it ran before, then it didn't run, and it asked me to send kind of an error report because the thing failed. Do you check that as well? And does this how does this work basically?
I'll let Gabriel go because I've been monopolizing the conversation. But if he doesn't want to answer it, I'm happy to.
No, don't worry. No, go ahead. No problem.
Okay, then yeah, like as you said, when you run the test, it says, hey, these tests failed or whatever. There is a mail server out on the host for qa.php.net who receives all of these reports, and it automatically drops these into a nice directory where all of this information about what operating system are you running, what other, how much memory you've got, how much free space is available, what distro, what not like personal information, but like enough detail to say like what can we do to recreate this issue, and that gets dropped into a set of reports. And if you go to qa.php.net without a login, you can see a certain view of that. We do obscure a tiny bit just because there's always a chance that something was accidentally captured in these reports. We don't want to make everything public by default. But with the right set of credentials, you can get a look at these reports, and release managers definitely have access to them. So that is a big valuable source of information.
Yeah, and we also have the bugs track system, the bugs.php.net, that people report bugs there. usually say, hey, I try to build with those configurations in this operational system with these flags, with this yada yada yada, and then we can mimic and try to understand what happened. So we have both the QA reports and also the bug reports during the RC, the alphas, and the whole release process. And of course, after the alpha, the general availability of 8.0.0, we have constantly bug reports which are being patched, because now we have way more people using, because it's a stable version. So yeah.
The public beta, as it's sometimes called.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I am going to say that bugs.php.net is definitely our preferred way of getting reports, largely because you've decided exactly what you're going to put in the report, and therefore we don't have to be concerned about accidental leakage of anything personal. But also because at that point, you've probably also done the work to say, like, hey, I've narrowed it down to this thing. I don't know what that means, but here's your simple reproduce script, as opposed to, well, a seg fault happened in this test. We need to try and recreate the conditions of that seg fault, which may not be as easy.
But one thing that I would like to highlight, which is happening since Nikita, specifically Nikita, has been hired by JetBrains and also Christoph in behalf of Microsoft. Those two, together with some other open source contributors, they have been improving a lot our QA and CI in the Git repository, in GitHub repository. So now we are testing across different architectures, across different operational systems, across a lot of stuff, so we can have a huge matrix that is gonna catch bugs instead of people catching those bugs. So I need to give that shout out, because they are doing an amazing job. There is still a lot of things to do, especially with databases. We need to test a lot of our databases. So if you want to contribute back to PHP and you understand, I don't know, Postgres, Microsoft databases, go back to the PHP GitHub repository and check it out, what you can do to help us, because we appreciate it.
One other shout out is Remy Collet. He works for Red Hat, and he runs a gigantic matrix of different distros and configurations on every single package up release. So he's on deck every 2 weeks to deal with that across multiple branches.
Yeah, I think what Gabriel just brought up, how to get involved. I guess that's a very, very interesting topic for a lot of people who are just consuming PHP. So I think for a lot of people it's quite abstract how the language works and how it evolves. Do you have some kind of easy pointers for people to get started with PHP, the language, and the C code and the process and maybe the internals or something like that?
I can give how I got into PHP.
Yeah, by default, I'm just going to give a pause to give you a chance to start, because I really don't want to monopolize the entire.
Don't worry, as I like to say, every time that I give interviews to start, I learn a lot, so I don't mind. But okay, so the way that I got into PHP was that I was studying about language, and there was this concept of open source. I was like, oh, what is open source? And at first, I associated open source with free money, like it's free. You can use it because it's free. But what is the main point now that I understand of open source is the ability of looking at what you're using. So PHP is one example. You use PHP daily in your company or in your side projects, but that thing, that language, is nothing else than a project that is in a Git server that you can go there, clone, and take a look. Of course, people, not all the PHP developers like to touch C code base, because as soon as they heard that it's writing C, they run away. So other things that you can contribute, and now is the time to give a huge shout out to, I think, one of the biggest milestones for PHP in the last, 5 years, which is the documentation of PHP. So since I think the beginning of the PHP documentation, it has been hosted on SVN. So there is the Git CVS, sorry, SVN. So CVS. So we have the CVS, which was where the documentation was hosted. And for years, there was a subdomain of PHP called edit, I think php.net, which was a UI where you're logging, contribute to PHP, XML. Was not the best process to contribute to documentation. And sometimes, if not all the times, people like to start with the documentation of a language or a thing to to start to contribute, because as soon as you start to read, you start to find typos, or you start to find things that you could improve. So the milestone that we have reached together, because of Andreas and some other folks that help this thing to come alive, was the migration from SVN to Git. So now the documentation of PHP is in Git, which is mirror on GitHub, which is the organization that I have linked in the chat of YouTube. So anyone now can go there and contributor. But the best part is now that if you go to the PHP website and you find something in a page, you just scroll up and there's a link called submit a pull request. And then you're going to be redirected to that repository, and then you can contribute. So that's another way of contributing to PHP, which is PHP's documentation. Then you have you can write tests I want to improve PHP by writing more tests to have more coverage. There is a PHP test fest. It's been offline for a couple of months, years, but nothing stopped to reunite that initiative. But it's not only the source code that you can contribute. You can contribute to the whole ecosystem. For example, we were talking before the live stream go on about Composer, right? They have helped PHP, and they haven't touched the C code base. They have improved the PHP ecosystem by creating a tool that helps us with autoload and a bunch of other stuff, and they haven't touched the C code base. So that's something that I also like to highlight. You don't need to touch the code base to help PHP. You can help PHP in so many ways, and that's my takeaway for them.
Yeah, I guess that's even.
Yeah,
sorry.
Oh, I was just going to echo Gabriel's comments that yes, there's documentation, there's tests, there's actual like internals code, and there's also the websites. The websites are also out there on Git, and if you just think that we're doing CSS wrong, by all means submit that pull request, because we're PHP people. We don't do HTML. Well, no, actually most of us do HTML JavaScript, but I wouldn't even know if you sent that pull request to me. And I did want to just clarify, documentation started on CVS. It has been on SVN most recently, and then yes, now it's on Git. It is not as simple as SVN to Git, as a lot of people seem to be assuming it is. There is actually quite a lot of metadata that we build into our translation system that took a, frankly, Herculean level of effort to get converted over to the new system. And I want to just double applauding everyone involved in that project, because that was an amazing thing. And for me personally, I know I couldn't stand to contribute to the documentation for the longest time, because I couldn't stand to go back to Subversion. And now I don't have to. And it's so wonderful.
That's great. That's just a few weeks ago, I guess.
Yeah, very recent.
I think that's a very, very awesome point to get to our next part, which is a small game we want to play, maybe to demystify the C code behind PHP. And Sara and Gabriel don't know which function they are going to see, but we hope they can figure it out. So Dennis.
If the release managers don't know the code, that's a sign that you shouldn't be using the language.
Oh no, I've got much more risk here, Gabriel, because I literally wrote the book on writing C implementations of PHP functions.
All right, so I don't. It's not even the actual function implementation. It's mostly the PHP underscore function where the function is defined. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
And let's just start with the first one. It's a short one to basically ease you into it. Can you tell us which function in PHP is defined here?
Oh, yes, I know which one that is, but I'm going to give Gabriel a shot.
Is the constructor for the Coro class?
Wait a minute. So basically, yeah, it's curl file create. I'm not sure if it's entirely the same, but it's curl underscore file underscore create.
The reason it looks like this and looks like it has an object going on is that we have a project underway that is converting all resource types to object types so that they can be typable within PHP script. So I think as of PHP 7.3 and earlier, if you do curl init, you'll get just an opaque resource, and there's no way to type that. After this conversion that was done, you can actually do things like X instance of curl file handle or things like that. So that's why you see object things in here. But yes, this is curl file create. Yeah.
All right, the next one, it's unfortunately a little bit longer, but let's see if you can guess what this is.
It has something to do with the daytime extension. Yeah. Okay, cool.
So yeah, this is going to be a method on the time zone object, date time zone object.
Yeah.
And what it's the specific function, since it's taking a time zone string. I want to say this is the constructor for daytime.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, that's my guess.
How could you tell it's the constructor? That's the
there's nothing like there's no like nail on the coffin as to what this is, but I'm thinking about the date time zone interface, and I can only think of one that takes the actual name of the time zone as a parameter, and that's got to be the constructor.
And also the initial for me was the time zone initialize. That's
a pretty good flag. Yeah, good call.
Okay, so the next one is one that probably everyone used as a PHP function, and I mostly put it in there because of the comment, to be fair.
Oh my.
Oh, I didn't know that comment was still in there. I haven't seen that comment in so long.
So you probably know which function it is?
I'll let Gabriel, or
so
do you?
There's a problem because flag.
Well, maybe not.
Oh, wow. Maybe not. No. Actually, I don't know.
It's the PHP info function.
Yeah, exactly.
Which funnily returns true. I honestly couldn't have told you it had a return value.
Print info. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So can I ask a question for you? You're asking us a question. Can I ask a question for you?
Yeah, sure. Understand.
Cool. So there's this thing called z_param_optional. Can you tell us what this thing does?
So it's are you asking them or are you asking me?
Them.
Oh yeah, let's see if you guys know what this means.
That is totally me because I have actually no idea about. I found it kind of interesting when I was pulling those things. I was basically just looking for PHP function and then look which ones seem interesting or funny, and then maybe fill up the lot with a few things that are just there and see if it's maybe interesting to you. And for me, the important bit was there should be something in there that points to something that for me looks, oh yeah, you can guess that. Like here it's the PHP info all, for example, or the PHP print info. That was basically, oh yeah, you can see that. But I don't really know what zparam does. Can you tell me?
I guess it's
about...
this part is about the description of the function arguments, right? So,
Yep.
So I guess the PHP info has one argument, and it's the description is that is optional, and it's a float.
Long means an integer type.
Integer, yeah. So so Sara, please correct me if I say something wrong. But basically, the Zen parameter extension, the Zen parse parameter, I don't think it's an extension or is a part of the PHP Zen engine.
It's an API.
API, there you go. It takes everything that you send to a function and converts that to C elements. So in this case, we are saying that we are going to receive 1 or 0 arguments. So we have 1 argument to this function, but none of them are mandatory. So the Zen parameter optional says that everything below that line is optional. You don't need to pass. If you want to, of course you can, but if you don't want to, you don't need it. So the Zen parse parameter is the API that takes everything that you send in the userland and converts that to C elements, so to speak.
Yeah, I just once had a brief look into how to write an extension. I think around 5 or 10 years ago, it was quite trendy to write your own extension to do some some heavy lifting, and back then I tried to do it in PHP 5.6. So
Wow.
Did you check? Did you read my book because it was still relevant at that time?
honestly, no.
Oh,
I'm sorry, but I think there was
What was the extension about? Do you still remember?
no. Honestly, I don't.
Yeah, now it's way easier to write extensions with the FFI. Is that FFI? FFI? I forgot that.
FFI is what it's called.
FFI.
I think FFI makes prototyping easier. I'm not sure it makes making real extensions that much better, but that's an argument that we could do an entire episode about.
All right, maybe next time. Let's go to the next question. I will skip this one because this is quite long again. Let's go for this one instead. So basically, now we have two, but can you guess
This
which
one
ones
you don't
then?
have enough information here for somebody to know what it does unless they already know what it does.
Ah, okay.
And I already know what it does, so I can tell you.
And also Boolean flags. I hate those Boolean flags because they don't tell you anything.
That is basically the thing why I put it in there, because first of all, the Boolean flag is like, oh, it looks like it's the same thing and it's just delegating it in there. And maybe Sarah, do you want to tell us?
Well, okay, so now that I've said it, I'm there's a whole bunch of time-related functions. I believe this is get time of day and get GM time of day, I think is what it's called. I can't remember the exact name. But you're right, these are delegators.
I think it should be microtime, the first one.
Oh, time and microtime?
Yeah. And that's
Okay.
why I found
That was my other
that,
guess.
like it's not even like the same naming or anything. It's like microtime, and then just make it one, and now it's get time of day, and it's even the same function. I just thought it's like really interesting to see that the names in PHP in the code don't necessarily match to the functions that are called underneath.
So this pattern you'll see in a bunch of places where you have two functions that they do a very, very common task, and getting the current time is returning it one way or the other. It's still a common task, but they have just tiny little differences maybe in what they return, which is the case here. So this just allows you to share things in a language that doesn't have templates, for example.
Yeah, another example that I can remember of these delegate functions is the array. Is the array part of the standard library where you have array functions and then you have the recursive alternative to that function. So usually you have this Boolean 0 and 1, which tells you that is recursive or not. So you can find a lot of examples there as well.
Okay, then let me maybe just skip this one again. So can you say which function this is?
PHP sleep.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. It's just
Get
sleep.
rid of the
Yeah, I just put it in there because it looks weird to have so much around sleep. It's just like, oh, there must be sleep in C as well. Why isn't there all this stuff there? But it actually makes sense if you, especially with the Z-param thing that you mentioned before. Like, yeah, obviously we need to get the parameters.
Sleep. Yeah. I thought it was die, but then when I saw PHP sleep, I was like, yeah, it's the sleep function.
Oh, that's a good. I should have looked up die. I didn't look at that. All right. Finally, the last one. This was one that I stumbled upon that I just found very endearing. That something like this is in the code. I'm really curious to see if you know this one.
I'm sorry, this is in the code? This is in the standard...
It's in PHP source. To be fair, it's in an extension, but it's
Is the I know is the Zend test extension, right?
No, it's X skeleton. If that helps.
Oh, that's
the
cheating.
skeleton.
That's cheating.
Skeleton.
I mean, it's for
Yeah.
testing, obviously. For the extensions, I saw that, and this is
Yeah,
test
no, that's
2.
fair. Yeah.
It was just funny to see like what is a function called test2 doing in there, and oh, it does some hello world kind of things. And I think test one just prints out that the extension itself was loaded. So
Well, that's what I thought Skeleton did. I didn't know Skeleton had a Hello World example in it. It's been a while since I've looked, and clearly this has been updated since 7.0. So yeah.
but it's the funny thing for me is that I mean those are just the function declarations basically, or the description for PHP. But I found it still quite interesting to see that it's kind of readable. You get the mapping. I mean, for me as someone who doesn't know C, doesn't write C, you get the hang of it really fast to at least find things around there. I still wouldn't trust myself touching anything in there, but yeah, it's pretty cool, and it's fun to see that you can basically just quickly recognize things from the code as well. All right, let me stop the screen.
Yeah, just one thing that I'd like to share. I think I learned that with Sara, which is why is not that difficult to contribute to PHP. If you take a look at that code, all of those were PHP functions, right? And if you take a closer look, everything starts with PHP function, which is in C called macros, right? If I'm not wrong, which would be basically, yeah, I don't know, helpers. Let's put it that way. So instead of every single time that you need to initialize a PHP function, you need to write a bunch of C code. What people did in the beginning was to extract that to a macro so you can use it everywhere. So for example, the Zen parse parameters or the ZPP that we call is a bunch of macros that you just need to start using in your function. So you don't need to take care of, oh, I'm gonna, so one example, when I did my first RFC, which was is countable, which was in PHP 7.3, I was like, oh, I'm gonna make a function. How do I process things that go from the user lane to the internals? Ta-da, it's ready, it's ZPP. You just use the ZPP API, done, no problems. So that's one of the reasons that is for me and also for others is easy to contribute to PHP, and the learning curve is not that huge. If of course talking about extension, if you want to contribute to the Zen machine, then we are talking something else. But the extensions themselves is not that difficult to understand. I don't know if it was on purpose in the beginning. Sarah can talk more about that, but yeah, is a clever.
It definitely was on purpose because the earliest form of PHP that you could call PHP, which was PHP 3, 1 and 2 have very different sorts of APIs internally and externally. But the very first version of PHP did not have a great extension API. It had sort of the thing that would get the job done in a way. I should mention PHP 3 was rewritten by Andy and Zev, the internal engine. They wanted something that was, and I'm going to say this the nicest way I can, not a complete S show the way Rasmus had laid it out. Rasmus will tell you himself, he does not know how to program and doesn't like to program. He didn't build PHP to be the world-class language that it was. He built it to put a counter on his resume. So when Andy and Zev got in there and wrote a proper engine for the language, they said, all right, we're going to set up at least a basic structure for a extension API here, but it's not going to be the easiest thing to work because we need to not spend too much time on this. So it did not have all of those affordances. When they did their proper rewrite for PHP 4, which is what we call Zen Engine 1, that's when we started to see these things that you're familiar with in modern PHP, like the PHP function macro, the Zen parse parameters API. Actually, Zen parse parameters, I think, didn't come until 4.3, and that was Andrzej Zamewski who added that. Before that, you had a generic API where you said Zen get parameters, and you just had a whole bunch of Zen vals. And these can be of any type, with any value in them, and you kind of have to do the juggling yourself. It was a functional API, but it wasn't great. Things have just continuously gotten better and better internally as well. And in fact, at 7.3, I believe it was Nikita introduced the use of stub files. Previously, when you defined a function, you actually had to do it in at least 3 different spots. You had the actual implementation, you had the arg info structure, which gave you type hinting on the args, and you had the function list entry that plugged it into the engine. What he did is he said, look, write out your APIs entirely in PHP code. Just write function foo open parentheses dollar int $x, exactly as you would write this in PHP, and then the build system will automatically generate all of the rote bits of that, and you can focus on the implementation inside. So yes, it's been getting steadily better along the way. And just to echo the bit about the internals sort of wanting you to understand how it works and wanting you to get into it, when I first got involved in the project, I knew nothing about how PHP's internals worked. I just knew that somebody in IRC said, hey, how come I can't take a logarithm in arbitrary bases? And I'm like, well, okay, A, just log this and divide it by log that and you're done. But like, hey, how come you can't? Maybe I should change PHP to make it do that. And I went looking for the PHP log function, and there it was, super easy to find. And oh, look, this is how it parses parameters. Super easy to understand. Toss in 3 lines of code, send an email with my pull request, since we didn't have pull requests at the time. And like Derek's like, yeah, look good, commit. And like, that is how easy PHP is to get involved in, and that is how easy PHP should be to get involved in. Off my soapbox.
Just 1 cent. Was between PHP 7.4 and PHP 8. Then Nikita introduced the stubs, which is another
new.
So is that new? Wow. And this is another feature that I like to talk in my PHP 8 talk, which is imagine. So we have 3,000 plus functions across all the extensions that we maintain in PHP. All those functions, they didn't have type information before PHP 8. So if you use the reflection API, yeah, sort of. If you use the reflection API and you say, hey, I have this internal function, for example, sleep. I want to know the arguments, I want to know the return type of the function, and I want to know the type of those arguments. Before PHP 8, you didn't have that information. Now with the stub system, now we have in PHP 8. So if you reflect, you have all this information. So for example, PHP Storm has JetBrains has a PHP Storm stubs repository that was just made for that. Now that's not necessary anymore. PHP Stun had their own version of that file. They don't need that anymore. Fan, which is another set analyzer, they also have had that. Better reflection, the examples go on and on and on. And now everything is centralized in one place. So if you wanna check it out, you just use the reflection API, which is another milestone for PHP 8, which is an internal change, but it's gonna affect probably everyone in the future. So yeah, PHP 8 is not just about the userland functions. Userland changes is also about the internal changes. There were a lot.
It's so weird to hear that, because I already think that 8.0 is an old version, because I'm always just building from head on my local machine. I'm like, oh wow, that is, from a user perspective, that's like a month-old feature. Wow.
Yeah, true.
But speaking of features, that's actually a good point. Like, we already talked about the internal features. Is there like an external facing feature, a userland feature in PHP 8 that you really enjoy the heck out of?
I'm going to jump in because I think it actually dovetails into what Gabriel was just talking, and that's union types. Union types is like the game changer for me, because right now there's so many APIs that you can't type because, well, this is a complex function. If it fails, it's going to return false. But if it succeeds, it's going to return this, unless it succeeds in this particular way, in which case it's going to return that. Or, hey, this function, it wants maybe an integer if you're sending it an epoch, or maybe it wants a string if you're sending it a description of the time. There are reasons why you can have multiple input and output types on your arguments and return types. So Nikita, again, this prolific just machine of PHP betterment, decided pretty early on that he wanted to add union types to the language. So he went through the RFC process, he designed it, he implemented, and now we have the ability to say, okay, this function takes int or string for its argument. It returns false or this object or string as its output. And while having a broader definition in what you accept and what you return isn't fantastic for having good typing through your system, it is much better than having no typing at all. And that type information also extends into the internal runtime. So I mentioned the returning false on error. Lots of PHP functions return false on error. So we have explicitly typed those to say, look, this returns string on success, false on error. You can reflect that. It's all in there. So, better than next.
Yeah, in my case, is not my favorite change in favorite function in PHP, but is what is gonna cause in the future of PHP, which is the attributes. In my case, annotations, decorators, whatever name you use for that thing. And the reason is, before PHP 8, every single library, every single framework, every single thing that wants to use attributes, they needed to have their own implementation or rely in a non-official implementation. And none of those things were type-proof, were cached, were nothing. In PHP 8 and with the attributes new functionality, a bunch of those parts are gonna be deprecated, and now everything's going to be centralized. So let's say that Symfony has found something to improve on the attributes. Not only Symfony is going to be beneficial from that change, but everyone else that is using the native attributes API in PHP is going to benefit from that. So typing information and also typing check is going to happen now with attributes, because before, if you just use annotations to make attributes, that thing was not typed, was just a comment that extensions and the libraries parse, do a lot of regular expressions and then come up with something, but they didn't check the type most of the times. So now internally we were doing that, and so everyone that is going to start to use the attributes functionality is going to be beneficial from that. And as I said, if someone finds an improvement or someone finds a bug, I don't need to replicate that to all the frameworks and all the libraries that have their own implementation. Is a centralized place now. So that thing for me is the best thing in PHP 8, not because of the functionality itself, but what is going to cause an impact in the ecosystem in the long run. And Benjamin, which is one, if not the one that created the RFC and implemented, I remember in SymfonyCon back in 2019, we were talking about doctrine, and he was like, "Yeah, I have this RFC that I'm coding, trying to come up with a POC, which is attributes." I was like, "Are you doing that?" He was like, "Yeah." I was like, "If you make that, you know that you're gonna change the ecosystem for a long time." He was like, "No, it's not that big." I was like, "Dude, you're gonna, not that you're gonna kill, but you're gonna centralize a lot of projects that is doing the annotations responsibility in the userland internally. Do you know how big that thing is going to be?" And there you go. We have that in PHP, and I just can't wait for the future to prove that was one of the best things of PHP 8.
I agree. I was really excited about that feature. That is so great to see it in core, and it was also great to follow the discussion around it, especially with the syntax change. It was from your standpoint as release managers, was it special? Like when exactly this? It was going on for so long. I was kind of afraid that, or maybe this is not going to happen like on the final stretch, just because all this arguing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, for those only listening, I just want to explain that I just mind clawing my eyes out, because emotionally that is actually a lot of what it felt like. But it was discussion that was worth it. I actually did the math on how many mails were sent around for a presentation I did a month or so ago, and I think it was like 600-700 emails that were exchanged on this topic of annotations. It was a redonkulous number across multiple threads. So nobody can say we didn't, think about this one before we did it. And fortunately, most of those emails were actually, very civil, just sort of like, hey, like, I think this. Oh, well, I think that. Tell me why you think this doesn't apply. A few of them were, one in particular, I'm going to call Derek out for this, was this is terrible and we should feel bad or something like that. Derek sent a very non-charitable email at one point about, I think it was version 2 of the syntax that we were using, because our syntax did go through at least 3 different very distinct forms on the way to its final version. But I mean, he just, it was meant to like sort of wake things back up, because he did feel very strongly that this was not the right solution. And he had some very good arguments for why it wasn't the right solution. He did include those arguments. So this turned into 3 or 4 separate RFCs between, well, 5 if you count the original attributes v1 back in 2013 or whatever it was, then attributes v2 that actually got accepted and turned into the initial version of attributes, I think using alligator clamps on the end, similar to hackling. Then it got the shorter attribute syntax, became double at and thing, and then revised attribute syntax became hash and square brackets because we realized we needed end delimiters for various reasons. It went through a lot of iterations. There was a lot of argument. I think the final vote actually came out pretty decisive. We did require 2/3 votes along the way. So, you know, although opinions changed over time, there was never a point to sort of like thwart the majority. Like it was always something, it had to be a majority decision. Hey, we've got new information. Let's make new choices based on that new information. It's okay to say we were wrong the first time. And I think what we wound up with at the end was a pretty good implementation. At least I hope it was.
Yeah, and that is a very good case to show that although we have the feature freeze date and we have a calendar, people usually don't follow that. So before the feature freeze, after the feature freeze, people are like, yeah, I have this small thing. We're like, yeah, what is the small thing? I want you to change the attribute syntax. We're like, that's not a small thing, but okay, if you want to discuss, let's discuss. But yeah, it happens all the time.
Yeah, most of those we have to say no to.
Yeah.
I think the thing with attributes that made it a little bit more of a special case was that it was a brand new feature and we were creating an API. And fixing a broken API trumps trying to keep feature freeze for feature freeze's sake and then breaking that API later.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense.
There's actually a question coming in from Tom in the
questions.
chat. So why was there no agreement about the read-only properties RFC? Are anything in the way, or where are the issues there?
I don't follow the discussion, so.
Oh, sorry, what, Gabriel?
I didn't follow the discussion. Yeah.
I haven't been keeping close tabs on the conversation. I followed it a little bit. But generically, I'm going to say if it never came to an RFC vote, it's because the person proposing the RFC decided that they couldn't get to a consensus with the people they were talking to. What I imagine to be the reason that there wasn't good consensus has to do with the fact that there are so many different ways to achieve the idea of a read-only property. And there are so many little corner cases. What do you do in the case of an inheritance chain where the ancestor defines the property as read-only, initializes it in the constructor, but then the child wants to change it still during the constructor, but they want it to be something else? Does that violate read-only? Is that okay for read-only? What should the syntax for it look like? Should it be a keyword read-only public foo, or should it be public foo accessor get equals read-only, something like that? There's a lot of ways that are all valid and have different pluses and minuses, and getting all of your people to agree is a challenge. It's a hard thing to do, particularly in a project like PHP where it is so purely open source. There is no BDFL who is ultimately in charge of the project. It is consensus driven, and we have to hit those 2/3 majorities to agree on what that final thing is going to look like. So sometimes that means things take a little longer to get there, like attributes. It took longer to get to there than it necessarily needed to, but hopefully what we wound up with was good.
Yeah, but speaking of discussions, one thing that I have on my list as well is the named arguments feature, because there was a lot of discussion in the user space, like how much should people rely on it, mostly in terms of open source work. So in libraries that I use from somewhere, how much burden is it for the maintainers of libraries? So do you have an opinion on that? Maybe suggestion how people should approach this feature?
Honestly, I feel like we gave people a gun to shoot themselves on the foot with there. I do think named parameters are good, and it is something that will be used for good, but there is a lot of opportunity for things to go poorly, especially right now in this transition time where we have a lot of libraries out there that were written in a universe that didn't have named arguments. So they're like, I'm going to call my internal argument $Fluffykins, And it doesn't matter because I'm the one that has to deal with this variable. Now we have pushed onto all of these library maintainers the contract with their users that what you named your variable, that is something that the end user is going to care about the naming of. And all I can say there to end users of libraries is try to avoid using named parameters for a couple of branches, like maybe day 1, day 2, something like that, just to give the library authors a chance to concrete up their APIs, and to library authors, you know what? I hate to say this, but maybe in your composer, say you don't support PHP 8 until you've had a chance to go through your names. As a release manager for 8.0, it makes me sad to think of people not using it, but it would make me more sad to think that you got backed into a corner as a library author into not being able to change your API. So hurry up and change and concrete your APIs, please. But we also have to be pragmatic about how we deal with the world that we're in.
Yeah, I think that's a thing I asked Niels last week. I had the opportunity to ask about the composer installs and updates that are already made with PHP 8. So I don't know if you're aware of the figures, but PHP installs right now are done with 1.86% of where the installation is PHP 8 and update is by 3.2. I'm not aware if that's a usual update ratio. It's 6 weeks old right now.
I'm familiar with the stats that Jordy puts out. I haven't looked at the most recent ones, but those numbers don't surprise me massively given the very short period of time that 8.0 has been out. I think it's going to be much more interesting to see his second half of the year update, and really an update a year from now is going to give us a much more telling thing. But when we look at the adoption of 7.0, I'm pretty sure we saw very similar hesitant numbers. I won't even say hesitant, just like practical and cautiously optimistic might even be the term. I don't know. There are always going to be more concerns going into a major version update than there will be going into a minor version update. And I like to think that 8.0 is going to be an easier time than 7.0 was, because 7.0 changed its internal API massively, so that's such that you had to rewrite any custom extensions you had. And it also changed universal valuable syntax, which meant that there could be hidden little landmines in your code that you don't know how they're going to break, but they'll break because you made some assumption about the behavior of the parser. So I think 8.0 has fewer of those, but I would not fault people for being cautious. Like, you don't want your site to go down just because somebody pushed a commit that forgot to update a major branch.
Oh boy.
Love you, Gabriel.
Love you. So in terms of the numbers, what I think happens in terms of major versions, I don't know about the minor ones. PHP 8 has so many good features, and PHP 8 has also JIT. Apart from JIT being stable or not, I'm not going to talk about that, but talking about the fact that we have JIT in PHP 8, I think that's going to push a lot of people. So for example, in the company that I work for, we are trying to push as soon as we can PHP 8 because we want to measure how that thing is going to impact our application, because we do a lot of heavy process in terms of Kafka receiving streamers of messages. And probably JIT is going to help us on that. So we are trying to push that as soon as we can. Of course, with major versions, especially when you Dockerize your stuff, you need to rebuild a bunch of stuff. So you need to be a little bit cautious on that. But I think, as Sara said, it's not as difficult as 7.0 to update, but it's not going to be a trivial one because it's a major. So with majors, we always have this very, very tiny things that now is deprecated or now is removed because it was nonsense. But people have been doing nonsense things with PHP since ever. So
yeah, the one that stands out for me is the change in associativity for ternary operations. If you have a chaining ternary, PHP has always done this backwards compared to other languages. With 8.0, we do it the right way. But if you didn't have parentheses on there before, you're probably going to have a bad time. But these are all in the upgrading, migrating documents. So check those out.
I just noticed today when reading those that the concatenation operator also changed precedence. And I was a little bit sad because Christopher and I, we used to do like PHP magic tricks and PHP quizzes with really mean questions. And now one of those questions is less applicable because it doesn't work in PHP 8 anymore. So probably good thing for most users, but
Yeah.
for those weird edge cases,
If I've made it less likely that you can go PHP WTF, then I think we've done the right thing.
Absolutely.
in this case, I think definitely that helped. But speaking of JIT, I remember in PHP 7, the performance impact it had was one of the huge selling points there. It was amazing. All the optimizations that went in there in making it more memory efficient, for example. And now with PHP 8, we have JIT. There's still performance improvements. Do you think that it's as big a leap, or is it still a selling point to upgrade to PHP 8 to get better performance, or are the types safety and things like that more important here?
I think with the exception of some very specialized workloads, no. You honestly should not expect to see any significant performance updates from PHP 8. You will see some. 5% is not unlikely, 10% is even possible. But you shouldn't expect to see the almost 2x improvement that you saw going from 5 to 7. 5 to 7 was basically the take out the trash update, where we got rid of a ton of inefficiency, is honestly the right way to put that. With 8.0 and the JIT, especially since, by the way, the JIT is not turned on by default, even if you turn the JIT on, you're really only going to see significant improvements if you have some very data intensive and non-IO bound workloads to deal with. The reality is most web applications are the opposite. They are IO bound and not data intensive. So for those workloads, the things that people use PHP for the most, no, this is not necessarily the fix that's going to make things great for you. But if you've got an offline processing job that you're running in the background and you're just going through rows and rows and rows of data that is, getting batched in faster than you can get to it, yeah, you might see a very appreciable difference there.
Yeah, I saw. Yes. So just to echo what Sarah said, I saw a talk from Ziv. I don't remember which conference was last year, and what he talked about JIT was, it's not about the users that we have, it's about the users that we don't have, right? So JIT in PHP is gonna probably bring more people to PHP from other scenarios that people didn't even consider PHP. Because we know that PHP is fast in terms of web, but now we want to see if PHP is fast in terms of having process that are atypical to web. So I think I agree with him that it's not about the users that we have, it's about the users that we want to have.
Yeah, that's a very.
I have
very
not heard him say
interesting
that, but it's a good way to put it.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, that was basically the same thing I want to ask. Like, basically, you're opening up to use PHP for new use cases, for new things, and that sounds interesting, especially with, for example, I remember some PHP AI stuff, machine learning stuff. I can imagine that could probably benefit from that.
Yeah, yeah. The previous company that I was working for is a case that Sara said that they process a bunch of spreadsheets from thousands and thousands, if not millions of lines from a very specific, it's not CSV, it's a proprietary type of file. I expect them to have massive performance because those processes take the whole night, like 10 hours to process with PHP. Now, probably with JIT, they're going to have faster process, so let's see.
Well, I would say we come to an end soon. So if you have a question for Sara and Gabriel, just shoot in the chat and we will ask them. Already, thanks for joining us tonight. This is really, really interesting, and it feels like we could go on for another hour. But I think you have something else to do today. We're heading till midnight here, and I think we can talk about the next episode already. The next episode will be on next Wednesday. Dennis, correct me if I'm wrong. it's about Xdebug version 3.0 with Derek Redhans. So a very interesting topic as well. I don't know if did you already update to the newest version?
Of Xdebug.
Yes.
So I have heard about it, and also I have heard that Xdebug 3 is going to be faster than Xdebug 2. So I'm really interested to combine PHP 8, Xdebug 3, and a bunch of other things that we use in our company to see how fast we're going to bring our local setup with Xdebug 3 and PHP 8. Let's see. Let's see.
So I think there are a lot of hearts today in the chat, and Tom writes thanks again. So
Rightfully so, I would say. PHP 8 is really great. As far as I haven't used it in production yet, I'm so looking forward to it. But all the new features are so great. So thank you for that as well, and to all the people you mentioned that contributed to it. And
The countless contributors who have gone into making
Yes.
PHP. Yeah.
and hopefully
Yes.
many more with PHP 9 or
I
until
hope so.
PHP 9.
That's November 2027, let's say. I'm going to put my prediction on the calendar now. Actually, probably earlier than that. But...
We put a calendar invite out for you for the release then.
All right.
all right. So I think that's it for tonight. Do you have a final message you want to get to the streaming crowd?
My final message, decisions are made by the people who show up. If you care about PHP, show up. There are lots of ways to contribute.
Yeah. And mine is from the line is just thanks everyone that made PHP 8 possible. We had a bunch of seniors and veterans that helped us make PHP 8 possible, but we had a lot, if not the majority of new contributors in PHP 8. And those were the ones that made PHP 8 possible. And so I want to thank them. Every single one that is working documentation, bugs, features, they're making PHP better and better every single day. And I can't wait to see what is going to happen in the future of PHP. So thanks, everyone. Let's keep up the good work because we have a lot of stuff to do.
All right. So thanks again to Gabriel and Sara as well. Thanks again for joining in, and I hope we see you next week. Good night. All right.